So it's a bit of a tradition for me. In my office, I keep a stuffed elephant. And children of all ages like to hug this elephant when we're doing our session. I actually, by the way, don't see many children who most would consider to be children. Most of my clients are adults, and yet there's something very comforting to them about holding on to this elephant. So he's helped me out with quite a few clients. Now, he's not the only elephant in the office. Thanks for joining us. There are several others, and one of them is this one that I found. And you probably can't see it real well there, but I'm going to put up a picture anyway. The fascinating thing about this elephant right here is that he's got this big box, and on top of that, there's a monkey sitting up there. He's got a monkey on his back, which, you know, is something that a few of my clients can relate to, and yet also it's kind of interesting to think about how we all have that small thinking part of us, like that monkey, and that big, powerful, unconscious force underneath. And you know, we sometimes use a metaphor comparing a horse and a rider, but I like to think about elephants myself. When I was a little boy, my father told me a story about a family in India, and they wanted to send their son to visit his cousins in a nearby village, but none of the adults in their family had time to accompany the son. So they simply put the little boy up on the back of the family elephant, kind of like the family station wagon to us, and put the elephant on the path into the jungle. Now this was a pretty dangerous jungle. It was filled with snakes, tigers, monkeys, bears, all sorts of dangerous things, and it had all sorts of winding paths going through it. But the little boy just curled up on the back of the elephant and rode into the dark forest as the sun was setting. Not particularly worried at all, even though there were a lot of different paths, and while he could still see in the diminishing light, he might look down a path and think, well, that must be the right one, and yet sometimes the elephant would turn off onto a different one. Or sometimes he'd see a path and say, oh, there's such a beautiful flower over there, I hope we'll go over there, but no, the elephant would turn down a less interesting looking path, and yet a mile or so later there would be even more flowers there. But eventually the night grew too dark, and the little boy curled up there. There's a bit of a hollow, they say, right behind the head of an elephant, just big enough for a child to curl up in. That little boy curled up, and he said, I can just rest now. I can just close the eyes down and drift off into dreams. And I don't know what kind of dreams he drifted off into. I've often thought that those dreams perhaps spanned all around the world throughout all time and space. And that perhaps in one of those dreams he dreamt of being a full-grown man, an American, in fact, who, sitting on the back of an elephant, insisted that his wife take his smartphone and take a picture of him on the back of the elephant and send it off to his brothers and his sisters and his parents because he so wanted them to see him. Here he was in his late 40s sitting on the back of an elephant. Of course, he sent off all of those pictures. Who knows, it was probably the middle of the night back in America, even though it was just morning, just the day starting there in Thailand, where he was on the back of this elephant, because he had taken his family there on vacation. And so they were going to take an elephant tour, and his wife and his children climbed up on the back of the elephant. And they all held on comfortably to the straps, and an elephant handler, I don't know what they call them in Thailand. In India, it's called a mahout, started guiding the elephant through the seaside city, showing them the beaches and the parks and the beautiful high-rise hotels. And they were having just a grand time until suddenly that elephant became very agitated and started to twitch and to move and to get more and more excited. And the mahout tried to calm it down, but nothing was working. And soon he completely lost control of it, and the elephant charged through the streets of the city, people running to get out of its way. The American and his wife and his children all clinging to the straps, not thinking at all about a little boy sleeping on the back of an elephant. In India, their eyes were wide as the elephant ran right out of the city and ran for the hills, getting higher and higher, up into the hills, running for the hills. And I often wonder what went through that man's mind. Was he thinking at that time about what an elephant is like? Because that question of what an elephant is like is one that an ancient king posed to several blind men. And the blind men, as the poem tells, went and gathered around the elephant, and each one surmised what an elephant is all about. One of them said an elephant is like a rope, because he had grabbed the tail. One of them said an elephant is like a wall, because he was touching the side. One said an elephant is like a mighty tree, because he was hugging the trunk. Hugging the leg, that is, which felt like the trunk of a tree. One was holding the trunk and said, oh, an elephant is like a snake. Another touched the tusk and said, an elephant is like a stone. And yet another touched the ear of the elephant and said, an elephant is like the leaf of a tree. And they all had a little bit of the truth, yet none of them quite saw the whole picture. The elephant was all of those things to all of those men. It's baffling, really. You know, elephants are baffling creatures. They have been for a long time. On one hand, I read the other day, just in the news, that in India, a bunch of young elephants broke into a village, broke into the brewery, and drank all the beer and went on a drunken spree, running around through the city, behaving belligerently and inappropriately, and probably vomiting in the wrong places. Not that there's a good place to do that. Until the people were able to guide them out. And yet at the same time, elephants are known for having a long memory, for recognizing friends that they haven't seen in years. And you know, it's so funny how you can recall a memory from early childhood or from long ago to help you to reconnect with things you've lost. And you know, it's said that they have a great talent for finding water during a drought, and I don't know whether that's their memory or some other sense, because as I said, elephants are baffling creatures. They also know when to listen to their elders. In the case of bull elephants who were young and causing trouble, harassing villages, destroying crops, people found it was often the case that that was an orphaned elephant. And if they just brought an older bull, an older male in, that elephant would fall into line and start behaving itself. And one of the other really puzzling things is that they can find each other over great distances. And especially in Africa, all the scientists were baffled over this one, until they said, we've got to figure out how this is working. And they tried all sorts of different things. And they set their minds to trying to solve that problem. And sometimes, you know, when you just try a lot of different things, you're going to find something unexpected finding something unexpected. Well, that's exactly what happened to an elephant handler that I knew in Texas at a festival that I used to work at. Because you see, we had all been excited, looking forward to the festival all summer long. We were eager to go to this festival, and lots of people drove in that day, a Saturday morning, excited to go into the festival. All of us who were ready to play our music, to tell our stories, to have fun there, we were excited. The animal handler brought an elephant out there to give rides to children, because he knew that a ride on the back of an elephant is something that no one ever forgets. But just before the gates were to open, the skies opened up instead, and rain poured down on us, and the entire fair site was flooded and muddy, and we were all having to leave. They canceled the event. All of us who had hoped to play music would play no music. All of us who'd hoped to make money would make no money. And that American mahout, that elephant handler, was looking sad and dejected as the rain was pouring all around him, and he trudged through the mud of the parking lot, leading his elephant behind him, looking at the people knee-deep in the mud, trying to push their cars out. And he looked over at some of them, and he said, "Hold on, wait, I've got an idea. Get back in your car." And they got in the car. And he led the elephant over. And the elephant dug its trunk down into the mud, burrowed its head down, and lifted that car right up out of the mud, lifted it free. And the woman driving that car hit the gas and then was moving. It's so interesting the way that an elephant has such strength that it can remove an obstacle. I suspect that's why in India, the god of removing obstacles is Ganesh. And Ganesh has the body of a man, built a bit like me, and the head of an elephant. So, he is, as I said, the remover of obstacles, which makes perfect sense with his, elephant head. But he's also the god of wisdom and of learning. And did I mention, in addition to having the elephant head and the human body, sometimes with 4 arms, sometimes holding an axe or a lightning bolt, other things, one of his tusks is broken. The other is whole, but the one is broken. And there's a story behind that, believe it or not. The story goes that Ganesh was very excited that he had an idea, but that he didn't have a pen. Now, this is an obstacle, isn't it? The interesting thing, some obstacles you have to push aside, and yet every god in Hinduism has its own mount, an animal that carries it, and we don't want to be too literal about that. Sometimes these are swans or peacocks that couldn't actually carry people. Well, in this case, Ganesh, his mount is a mouse, a little mouse. Now, the thing about a mouse is that if there's ever an obstacle that Ganesh is not strong enough to push aside, well, the mouse can find a crack and slip through it, can find that little loophole. And if there's no loophole, that's all right. The mouse can patiently chew through it. And it's funny, the connection between elephants and mice. It's an old folk tale in Western civilization that says that elephants are afraid of mice. Now, some scientists wanted to find out whether or not this was true, and so they would carefully get a mouse and turn it loose close to an elephant, and the mouse would go skittering across where that elephant was standing. What they found is that no, elephants are actually not afraid of mice, but they also won't step on them. They're respectful. They have great precision along with their amazing power, that they can notice something as tiny as a mouse and avoid stepping on it. You know, elephants, of course, I mentioned, are baffling creatures, yet they seem to have amazing abilities of problem solving. I had a friend who was actually a zookeeper in Arizona. He told me fascinating stories about the elephants. For example, they have an elephant enclosure there, and the people are up high and the elephants are down low. And there's a steep sort of ravine to keep the elephants in and to keep, the people out. And planted up high along there were plants. Just landscaping to make it look nice. Well, the zookeepers came in one morning and they noticed that some of those plants were gone, ripped right out of the ground. They were looking around going, what? Who on earth could do that? I mean, the elephants can't reach. And, they looked down on the ground and they saw little bits of those leaves, little bits of the twigs down there on the ground. Clearly, the elephants had pulled those out, but that was way higher than any elephant could possibly reach. And they puzzled over how the heck that was possible. How did they get to those plants? Well, they decided that the thing to do was to set up a camera and watch them overnight. They did a lot of interesting experiments like that with the elephants. That actually, those same elephants at that place would be given paintbrushes and big canvases, and they would paint pictures. And it was often thought that these were just sort of abstract, random things until there was a fire there at the zoo. And later that day, the picture, though very blurry and a bit Van Goghish, I guess, depicted a large red shape with black shapes where the tires would be. Very curious. Now, elephants aren't just visual artists. They're also musicians. There are zoos and sanctuaries where they've given elephants instruments. Now, they've tried all sorts of things. They've tried great big synthesizers, but elephants don't like that electronic, unnatural stuff. They seem to know how to turn away from the synthetic and turn toward the natural solutions. And so they tend to like drums that they can beat. The only problem with that, of course, is that once you give an elephant a drumstick, which is about the size of a baseball bat, and he starts playing the drum, do you know how to get one to stop? Neither does anyone else. You really can't get them to stop because elephants are incredibly strong. And that's the thing that a certain English traveler in India was trying to explain to the mahout when they were all going to bed one night, and he saw that the mahout went over to this great big strong bull elephant that had been carrying them all day long, and he put the tiniest, flimsiest rope around the elephant's leg and staked it down, barely even bothering to drive the stake into the ground. And this British traveler kept saying, that's crazy, the elephant's just going to pop that right out of the ground and walk away. There's no way that that's going to hold. I mean, you could even get a chain and that wouldn't hold the elephant. This is nuts. And the mahout just rolled his eyes and he said, yes, do not worry, it will be fine, it will be fine. And so the next morning, they got up and the elephant was still there. Didn't move, didn't go after other food or anything, didn't wander away until the mahout took that flimsy little rope off of its leg. And every night that would happen. And every night the British traveler was worried, wondering, and he would look at this elephant with such strength that it wasn't using, with such resources that it wasn't applying. And it's so strange the way that you can have such strength and not use it. And he would think, doesn't he know he's strong enough to be free? Doesn't he know that he could break free from that? Well, finally, that British traveler could stand it no more. And he said to the mahout, how on earth is this possible? How could such a strong creature be limited in such a way? And the mahout said, well, it's really very simple. When he was just old enough to stand, I tied that rope around his leg. I drove it into the ground, nice and strong. And that little baby elephant pulled and pulled and pulled and could not gain his freedom. And then he gave up. And he hasn't bothered to try ever since. And it's so funny to think about how he could have broken free. He could have solved that problem if he simply applied himself. And yet all night long, he didn't even bother to try. Now, he wasn't like the elephants in Arizona at the zoo who had that camera pointed at them in the night. They were able to solve problems because, the next morning the zookeepers watched very carefully as these elephants gathered up some barrels that they had sitting around as toys. And they rolled all those barrels up to the edge of the ravine. And they piled them up like a staircase, and then walked right up and snatched the plants. Because they were able to solve that problem. They were able to apply their creativity and their minds to getting past that obstacle, which is exactly why Ganesh has a broken tusk. Because when that poem came into his mind and he had no pen to write with, he was so determined to capture that dream, to save it, to embrace it, that he even broke off his tusk and used it as a pen to write the story. Because, at the outset of any task, you must have drive, you must have wisdom. And that is why the Hindus invoke Ganesh at the beginning of anything that they do. Whether it's spiritual, such as a prayer, whether it's business, because they feel that Ganesh clears the path to make money. And that's exactly what that elephant handler in Texas was doing that day. He didn't mean to. He was just thinking, well, I might as well push these people out of the mud. But as the car got to safety, the woman driving it rolled down the window and she held out a $20 bill and said, come get this. Thank you, thank you. And he looked around, and where he had seen before a day lost, an opportunity to make money gone in the rain, he saw a parking lot full of customers. And he went to each car and pushed them out and accepted whatever money they offered him. Some people loved it so much that they drove back around and they got stuck again so that they could pay him again, because it was the best ride that they could imagine having, that they could have fun on a rainy day because of that creativity. Because tourists, everybody, we love elephants, except, of course, that American tourist with his family in Thailand, who were all clinging to the harness on the back of the elephant, rushing up the mountain roads into the hills far away from that seaside tourist resort. And it rode and ran, and they rode and they ran until they got higher and higher up into the hills. And finally the elephant stopped, and this man thought, my God, we're far away from anyone. We've lost the mahout. This is terrible. I'm traumatized. My children have been screaming. And he turned around to look back to the resort city and to see that it was flooded. Completely flooded. Because a tsunami had come in. Now, how on earth did that elephant know about the tsunami? Well, it turns out a tsunami makes an awful lot of noise that's just way too low for us to hear. Yet elephants, as it was found by those African scientists who were so baffled by how they could meet up over great distances, have the ability not only to generate but also to hear frequencies way too low for the human ear. But the scientists set up microphones. They expanded their perception and were able to tap in to that unseen, unknown communication. What seemed miraculous was actually natural. And so those elephants in Africa would communicate over great distances by making subsonic sounds, by having long-distance communications that we did not know about. And it's so interesting to think about how much is beyond our perception, how much goes on beneath the surface. And it's interesting to think that that same capacity was how the elephant heard the tsunami coming. And rather than menacing this family, he saved them as he ran for the hills. Now, of course, this man, once he caught his breath, once they were all stopped, he took out his phone to contact his family, to let them know he was all right. Well, they had woken up by now, and they'd all looked at these pictures, and they'd all sent messages back to him saying, "Why are you sending us pictures of you on the back of an elephant? What's the big deal about you getting to go on an elephant ride?" And he thought, they don't know? They don't know that when we were children and I was 8 years old, I was the last in line at the fair to get to ride on the elephant? And that closing time came before I ever got on its back. And all these years it's been bothering me that I didn't get to ride the elephant. And finally, on that one day, he did ride the elephant. And it carried him safely away from the storm. Just the way that that family elephant in India with the little boy curled up on its back safely chose the right paths, safely carried the little boy into his cousin's village as the sun was rising. And as he woke up from his dream and thought about how wonderful it is to ride on the back of an elephant, what it is to realize that an elephant is strong, wise, and foolish all at once, and to think about how we have an elephant that we're riding, that we're not unlike this little monkey on the elephant. Of course, now, we also know that expression to have a different metaphor of having a monkey on your back. So if you were here, I would simply ask you to find out what happens when you take the monkey off the elephant's back and discover that inside there's a beautiful treasure waiting